Yes, Nidhi ji, you can go ahead.
Sure. Namaste, everyone. Welcome to this session, and thank you to Voice of India Academy for hosting me for this session, where we are going to undertake a book discussion and a book review on Douglas Murray's recently released book, not recent, but released in early 2025 on democracies and death cults, Israel and the future of civilization. I welcome all of you. I thank Voice of India for this opportunity, and it's a Sunday evening still. Some of you have managed to join me in this interesting and important discussion. So I hope that I will be able to do justice to it and we can take questions at the end of the presentation. So I'm going ahead and sharing my screen. Biswajit ji, you can confirm if my screen is visible. Just a moment. Is my screen visible to everyone?
No, it's still not yet.
Okay, just give me a
Yeah,
moment.
we can see.
Okay, I'll take everyone to full screen, full presentation. Just a moment. Great. So today we are going to talk about Douglas Murray's book, which was published in 2025 on democracies and death cults, Israel and the future of civilization. This is the title of the book. And I'll be happy to take you through several aspects of the book. Firstly, establishing a context of why this book was written and why it is important, a brief introduction to the author's work, uh, some details about the contents of the book. The book is divided into 5 chapters, so we will look at what each chapter contains. Some of the core arguments of Douglas Murray's work. What are the highlights of the book? For what kind of audience has the book been written? And in the end, I will share some personal reflection as well as some critical appraisal of the book. So let's begin the session. Let me know if my slides move or not because yeah, great.
Yeah, it's moving.
Yes. So, as all of us know, the threat of terrorism, the threat of violence from non state actors has been a very crucial threat that the world and especially human civilization has been facing since quite some time. And in this context, all of us will recall October 7th, 2023, where Israel was attacked brutally by Hamas terrorists. And this attack was targeted at the Nova Music Festival in Israel on this eventful day. It has been 2 years after this attack, and this was believed to be the worst massacre, the worst anti Jewish, anti Semitic massacre since the Holocaust. And news about this terrorist attack was live streamed all across the globe, even as the events were going on, even as terrorists from Hamas crossed Gaza, flew down into Israel, attacked the Nova Music Festival and the revelers over there, took many hostages and brutally massacred, maimed, tortured, and inflicted violence on Israeli civilians. The world saw all of this in unprecedented shock, and this was telecasted all over the media across the globe. So, Douglas Murray's book is based on this terrorist attack. It is an intellectual response to what happened on that fateful day in Israel on October 7, 2023. Now, what we know about the attack, and there are several documentaries on this attack now. Uh, this attack was carried out by Hamas, which is a terrorist group situated inside Palestine on the Gaza border with Israel. And there were some other affiliated terrorist groups also that were involved in this massacre. Close to 1,200 people, Israeli civilians, were massacred by these terrorists. There is a lot of testimony that is now available in the public domain as to what happened. There were live recordings. If all of you recall, a German lady was dragged by Hamas across the border, and the entire incident was displayed on the media. And there were at least 250 Israeli citizens who were taken hostages by Hamas. And to this day, there are negotiations going on between Israel and Hamas about the release of hostages. And the latest news tells us that there are still some hostages in capture by Hamas. So this was an attack right inside the heart of Israel and the Jewish civilization. This was an attack on a music festival where people were relaxing, dancing, enjoying, they were celebrating life, and suddenly you have Hamas terrorists landing in Israel with from parachutes and massacring people left, right, and center. Of course, the Israeli Defense Forces, that is IDF, realized the call of the moment, and they immediately swung into action once alarm bells went all around Israel that such a heinous terrorist attack had taken place. Post this attack, there was worldwide outrage, but there was also a very different side to this, to the response that we saw in the world. There were protests across Western university campuses. There were slogans like "Globalize the Intifada." In Western university campuses, and especially on streets in Western cities, you saw this slogan, which has now become the catchphrase of the Palestinian supporters: from the river to the sea, Palestine must be free. Here, the river means the Jordan River and the sea means the Mediterranean Sea. So we saw a lot of protests, violent movements, demonstrations in Western cities in Western countries in support of Palestine. Of course, there were also demonstrations in support of Israel. So, this attack ensured that the issue did not remain confined only to Israel, but it became a global issue. And we also know that October 7, 2023, after the Israeli response was very, very fierce, it was very, very calibrated, and it marked the commencement of the ongoing Israel Palestine conflict, which we see it's ongoing even today. And in between, there are calls for ceasefire. There is news about hostage release, and there is news about truce and mediation from the United States of America to kind of bring an end to this conflict. So, Douglas Murray's book, which I, by the way, have with me, but because of the background, you may not see it clearly, it is written in the context of October 7, 2023 Hamas terrorist attacks. So, we can say that this event, that is October 7, 2023, is a pivot, it's the center point of this book, and it presents a very fascinating argument about not just what is happening in Israel, but what this could mean for the entire world. So I just wanted to set the context and set the background for this book discussion before we move further. And I encourage all of you, if you just Google, there are many documentaries on the Nova Music Festival massacre. You will be able to watch what exactly happened on October 7, 2023. Of course, it was brutal. And thereafter, there were also efforts at documenting testimonies of the victims and survivors and their families of Israeli civilians who lost their lives, who were affected by this terrorist attack. Now, I would like to provide a brief background to Douglas Murray's ideas and works. And it is important because when we are looking at a book by a certain author, just a minute. Yeah. When we are looking at a book by a certain author, it is important that we understand the background of his work, his contributions, the intellectual stream that he comes from, so that we can understand his work better. So basically, Mr. Douglas Murray is a journalist and he's a researcher, but he's also a public intellectual. He was born in London. Currently, he stays in New York, and he is the author of several important books. For example, The War on the West, published in 2022, The Strange Death of Europe in 2017, Neoconservatism, Why We Need It in 2005. So he has written several books, but typically, he's very well known for his journalistic work. He's a culture commentator, he is a critic, but uh, he's most known for his work as a journalist, as a reporter on ground, because he has reported from the front lines of conflict from Iraq, North Korea, Nigeria, Ukraine, Israel, and Gaza. So he's basically a journalist and a researcher. He's also associated with several newspapers and magazines, so he's a leading figure in the public discourse. He's a contributing editor for publications like the Free Press, the Spectator, the New York Post, the Telegraph. He is a prolific debater, and you will, if you follow politics, international relations, geopolitics, and if you're interested in all these domains, you will see him regularly appearing on TV news media and platforms, especially in Britain and America. And he speaks and writes on a lot of contentious political issues. For example, British politics, war, culture, identity, multiculturalism, terrorism, politics, religion, university campus politics, public discourse, media, reportage. So he writes on a lot of issues. So you can call him a public intellectual and an author. His books have been international bestsellers, and he studied at the Oxford University. And in the year 2007, he founded the Center for Social Cohesion, which was the first think tank in Britain devoted to the study of extremism and terrorism. So, this is a little bit about his background, and you can follow him after this session. So, what I particularly like about Douglas Murray's work, because primarily I also come from a media and communication studies background, so that is how I started following him. His work is very fresh, it is very novel, and it always adds something new, a new thought to the public discourse. Even his opponents have recognized that he brings in something very, very valuable to the battle of ideas. And if you're a thinking person, then Douglas Murray's books are for you, because he has this excellent ability to articulate his thoughts very well. And if you are a student of communication, political science, or someone just generally interested in world affairs, you should follow his work, because he has also got some excellent public speaking skills. And a lot of his scholarship, both his journalistic work and his books, they emanate from first-hand primary data. He does actual on-ground field research to bring a lot of interesting work to the table. And he has from his body of work, you will realize that he comes from a conservative, and by conservative, I mean in terms of political ideology, he comes from the conservative school of thought, and he is in the line of many thinkers like Roger Scruton, Ayaan Ali Hirsi, and others. So he's someone to follow if you're interested in that kind of a work. Okay. I'm unable to move my slides. Yeah. Okay, now that we have understood a little bit about the author's background and profile, let us go through the schemata of this book, the table of contents. So it is divided into 5 chapters. There is an introduction, there is an acknowledgement section, and then there are some references that Murray gives. So there are 5 chapters, and if you look at the titles of these chapters, what happened on October 7th, what I saw. So Douglas Murray actually went into Israel and Gaza after October 7 and did some on-ground reporting. So he's reported on what he saw. How the world turned, he's talked about how the world reacted to the massacre, the disconnect, where he's typically talking about the reaction of the Western world to October 7. And then lastly, the last chapter is dedicated to examples of Israeli citizens who showed courage and grit in dealing with this terrorist attack in their country. So let's go one by one. So, in chapter 1, that is what happened on October 7, the author provides a broader political and historical context to the conflict between Israel and Palestine and the actions of Hamas on October 7. He also includes personal accounts of suffering by Israeli citizens and military personnel at the hands of Hamas. So, there is a background that is laid in chapter 1. There are survivor accounts because Murray, as I told you, went to Israel and Gaza. He reported from the front line and he spoke to those who had survived the massacre, those who had fled from the site of the Nova Music Festival. And he also spoke to the families of those who were taken hostage and families of those who had lost their near and dear ones. So, this is what chapter 1 is all about. Chapter 2 is what I saw. So he is recounting his experiences and sharing with the reader first hand data from the interviews that he did with Israeli civilians who had suffered in this terrorist attack. He spoke to Israeli hostages. He highlights the use of tunnels by Hamas, the use of innocent Palestinians as human shields by Hamas. He talks about the involvement of global powers in the conflict, and he also talks about the narrative warfare that was undertaken by Hamas and its supporters, and that which was mainstreamed in Western media and Western public life. So, this is a chapter where there are a lot of testimonies, on ground reportage, meetings, and interviews with the families of those killed and taken hostage are discussed. Israel's response to this terrorist attack is also discussed. How Israel got into action to defeat Hamas is discussed threadbare in the second chapter. In the third chapter, which is How the World Turned, and I request everyone's attention on the title of this chapter, How the World Turned, because Murray expected a very different reaction to this attack. He expected that there will be outright global condemnation of Hamas and its terrorist activities, but in his own hometown, London, he found that there was a lot of support for Hamas. So, in this chapter, he discusses the global response and reaction to the events of October 7. And this response and reaction he has talked about in the context of the Western world, Western civilization, as there were many protests in Western cities. There were calls for globalizing the Intifada. So, in this chapter, he documents in detail the pro Hamas lobby in the West, the support for Hamas in Western campuses. All of us, if you have followed this event, you would know that many elite Western university campuses like Harvard, Princeton, Yale, Columbia, etc. There were encampments of students who were shouting pro-Palestinian slogans. Many of the students during their graduation ceremony, they tore their degrees in support of Palestine. Unfortunately, many Indian students also uh, were at the forefront of these protests. You will recall that a few of them were also deported. And there were many incidents in Western campuses where there was intimidation and harassment of Jewish students and professors. So here in the third chapter, he documents these incidences. So, for example, synagogues were attacked. The posters of hostages that Jews had placed across Western cities for support, those posters were torn. There was harassment and intimidation. And in this chapter, he also discusses the historical and doctrinal roots of anti Semitism. So, in this chapter, Murray raises a very important question. Rather, he also tries to answer it. Why does the world despise Jews? What are the reasons behind the intense anti-Jewish sentiment all across the world, especially after the Holocaust? The fourth chapter is titled The Disconnect, and by disconnect, he means that he was clearly disillusioned on evaluating and examining the West's response to October 7. So he discusses the role of Hamas and its leaders. He also discusses how the Western world is living in its own illusion and is rejecting ground realities as far as radical ideologies are concerned. He also discusses the geopolitics of the Middle East, which, by the way, is a very complex topic, and this is not a book meant for that. So he discusses it in brief. And he also discusses the internal differences in Israel, especially with respect to the response to October 7 and also the long war that Israel has now been drawn into post October 7. And of course, some internal politics and internal issues that Israel dealt with as their government was dealing with October 7 and response. So, in the fourth chapter, he discusses the reality of Gaza because he also traveled to Gaza. He reported from Gaza and Hamas. And uh, in the last chapter, so it's not a very lengthy book, neatly and clearly divided into five chapters. So in the fifth chapter, after describing all that happened on that eventful day and after October 7, he talks about the courage, the spirit, the grit, and the determination that was displayed by ordinary Israeli citizens, the IDF, the government of Israel, and how Israel dealt with October 7 and the events that unfolded after that. So, if you look at the structure of the book, it's very logical, it's deeply reasoned, it's very clear eyed, and it is grounded in fact. So, this kind of structure, it holds the reader for a long time. It captures the attention of the reader. It is very, very gripping. And anybody who wishes to understand finer nuances about the conflict happening in the Middle East, they will be facilitated and aided by such a structure. So this is the schemata of the book. This is how the book flows and progresses. Now, I am going to discuss some of Murray's important arguments. I'm going to discuss the crux of this work. And of course, when we read any author, we can't read him or her in vacuum. We have to also look at the kind of work they have done before. Unfortunately, I have not read other books by Douglas Murray, though I'm now keenly interested and follow his popular writings in the news media space. But since he has written a lot, I would definitely like to explore this further on. But this is the first book written by him that I have read. So it is when we look at a book, it has some core arguments, it has some major arguments which we need to understand as readers. And the entire purpose of doing this session is for people to explore this issue, to explore these books. And that is why I'm presenting a few major arguments that Douglas Murray makes in this work. So, this book is all about his encounters. As I said, he's a reporter, journalist. If you switch on to BBC sometimes or Sky News, you will see him reporting. He's also reported live from the Israel-Gaza border. So, one major important component of his book is that he's sharing his encounters of reporting on the conflict. Number two, he also doesn't limit his writing and explanation to telling us about how the conflict affected Israel and Palestine. The major argument is that this conflict, even though it was geographically limited to a particular region in the world, the impact and the consequences were global. It impacted the Western world in a major way. And that is a very fundamental argument that Murray is making in this book. He shares how the conflict plays out in the Western world, in Western governments, in Western university campuses, in Western media, Western institutions, and Western civil society. So, if there was one core argument, or how he has framed the entire conflict, or how he has given us a very different lens to think about the conflict, he says that uh, this conflict is not important just for Israel. It is also important for Western civilization, because currently the position that Israel finds itself in, the same can happen to Western civilization if they don't give a befitting response to radical ideologies and the threat posed by these radical ideologies. So he's trying to say that Israel is the defender of all those values that we cherish today: freedom, dignity, human rights, equality, justice, individualism, pluralism, multiculturalism. He says Israel, and this is the fact, that Israel is the only thriving democracy in the Middle East. All other Middle Eastern countries are authoritarian regimes. So he says that post October 7, not just Israel, but even the Western world should take this event seriously, because if Israel ceases to exist as Hamas wants, and we all know that the charter of Hamas calls for the annihilation of Israel. The charter of Hamas calls for the destruction of Israel. So he says that if Israel collapses, if Israel ceases to exist, if it is wiped off the map of the world, that will not just be a collapse of Israel, it will be the collapse of the civilized world as we know it. It will be the collapse, and it will ring a death knell for all the values that we cherish: freedom, individualism, equality, justice, human rights, etc. So, for him, and this is exactly the argument of his entire work, that Israel is not just defending its own borders or its own territorial integrity and sovereignty, but it is also defending Western civilization. And if Israel is threatened, if Israel loses this war, Western civilization will also lose out, and the next threat will be to the Western civilization. Another thing that he does through his on ground work is that he documents the rising instances of anti Semitism, which is anti Jewish sentiment across the West, because we know that after October 7, there were many anti Semitic incidences taking place across the Western world. Recently, we know of the Bondi Beach terror attack in Australia. So he details out all these instances, he documents them, and he raises concern for rising anti Semitism across the Western world. He also documents the nature and consequences of protests on Western campuses and in Western cities. So, that is also a major portion of the book where he's trying to understand that why would people in the Western world, the so-called civilized world, would stand for and would protest in support for a terrorist organization like Hamas. He's trying to understand why this happened. He's bewildered. He's shocked at why this happened. And in one of the chapters, he says that the victims became the culprits and the culprits become the victims. So he expected sympathy for those Israeli civilians who were attacked on October 7, but he is shocked because the sympathy in the Western world was for Palestine and Gaza in the immediate aftermath of the attack, even before Israel had responded in full might and force. He also calls out biased Western media coverage of October 7. And in this, he specifically critiques American media, British media, and Al Jazeera, which is based in Qatar. So he calls out biased Western media coverage. I will just also give you an example for this one. Just a minute. I may also try and read some excerpts from the book as and when I find that we should read. Yeah, so I'll come back to it. So because he's a journalist and a reporter, he has also taken this opportunity in his book to analyze media coverage of the events of the Israel Palestine conflict, and he critiques Western media coverage. He also criticizes the irresponsible role that has been played by international organizations such as the UN, because he says that they played a very one sided role against Israel. And he said that the entire world, especially the Western world, should have stood up to protect the only Jewish state in the world, but they did not live up to this responsibility. And one narrative that he manages to bust in his book is that the decolonization narrative that has been weaponized by the left in support of Palestine and in support of presenting Palestinians as forever victims. He dismisses this narrative and he calls this out. And the other side, which uses the decolonization narrative, we know that it criticizes the Israeli state as an occupier state. उसी से वो slogan है from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. So they think of, or they position Israel as settler colonial state which has forcibly occupied Palestinian territory and which is committing terrible atrocities against the rightful owners of that land, that is Palestinians. So he demolishes this decolonization argument that is being used to justify what Hamas did on October 7, 2023. So these are some major arguments that Murray makes in his book, and this is what the book revolves around. I was hoping to play this video, but I don't think I'll be able to play it from here. There is some error. So let's kind of move to the next slide, and I will try and show a video at the end of the session. So as when we read a book, especially on such an important topic, I think we ought to think about why is the book significant. And being a student of political science and international relations, I tried to think about why the book is significant. Of course, there are many books that Douglas Murray has written, but this is significant for several reasons. Number one is that this book it's a very solid theoretical, intellectual, and philosophical response. So it is not hanging in vacuum. It is based on some theoretical, intellectual, and philosophical plane in terms of understanding the Israel Palestine conflict, especially for us to understand the events of October 7. So, any theoretical, intellectual, and philosophical position is solid when it has moral clarity. And this is what Douglas Murray does in his book. His arguments have a lot of moral clarity about how the Western world should deal with radical ideologies. He's only talking about the Western world. He's not talking about India. He's not talking about any other part of the world. His focus is on the West's response. And as I said, because he comes from a particular school of political thought, if you have ever looked at the works of Sir Roger Scruton, Niall Ferguson, Ayaan Ali Hirsi, they also talk on similar lines. So I think he's following on the footsteps of these thinkers. So he's not just a journalist, but he is an intellectual. Second, it shows a mirror to the Western world. As I said, the book is completely focused on the response of the West. So we know the West as the beacon of human civilization, the beacon of individual freedom, human rights, social justice, etc., etc. So uh, the author is kind of disappointed with the West's response to October 7. So he says that the Western world has to introspect. It has to look inwards. It has to critically examine what they have done to their own countries. And in the name of supporting ideas like multiculturalism, diversity, social justice, tolerance, accommodation, etc., what has the West done to it? And this was very, very visible in the recent Bondi Beach terror attack. If you paid attention to the statement of Australian Prime Minister Anthony Albanese after the attack, it more than being concerned about the victims of the attack, his response was more focused towards tackling other ideologies. So, in this book, the author says that the Western world is complicit. It is hands in glove in weakening the civilizational position based on the response that it has given to October 7. And he's criticizing the Western response. Throughout the book, he presents a very sharp and fierce criticism of the West's response to October 7. And he says that if human civilization will weaken and if human civilization will succumb to radical ideologies, the responsibility lies with the Western world. So he kind of shows, he kind of calls out the intellectual decay and the stagnation that Western society finds itself in, especially Western media, Western academia, Western governments, Western leadership. And he's positing this in a very specific context. He's talking about the mass immigration that happened from different parts of the world, especially from the Middle East, to different countries of Europe in 2015 after a lot of civil strife in the Middle East. He's also discussing on very contemporary concepts in this book. So the concepts that are in vogue today, they are being discussed everywhere. He is discussing these concepts in his book. So, for example, cancel culture, wokeism, critical race theory. These are concepts that he's discussing, of course, in light of October 7. And he's very clear that these are being weaponized by the leftist ecosystem to weaken human civilization. He is also very, very clearly, he makes no. Uh, so, what I mean to say is that he's very clear that through his work, he's representing Israel's point of view. And as an author, he does it with a lot of clarity and courage. He doesn't shy away from it at all. And he challenges the conventional narrative that we saw or still see about October 7 in mainstream media. And he just doesn't bluff around when he's doing this. He's presented a lot of evidence, logic, and crisp arguments, as I already shared. He's a journalist with a lot of experience in ground reportage, especially in war zones. So he's not presenting the argument that mainstream media presents. His argument is completely different, and his narrative is also completely different. We know that global media narratives have been favorable to Palestine, but this book presents what the Israeli point of view is. And we know that global media coverage, if any of you have paid attention to that or have analyzed it, global media coverage have it always tends to show Palestinians as victims and Israel as the perpetrator. But in this book, the author is challenging this narrative, and he stays with it right till the end. And of course, he gives his reasons as to why he's challenging this narrative. Uh, Another important thing why sorry, let me go back. Yeah. Another thing why I think that the book is important, because in journalism, we always we always talk about speaking truth to power. I think Murray does it through his book. You may not like what he's doing, or you may be completely on the opposite end of the ideological spectrum, but you can't deny that he's actually speaking truth to power, because he's calling out the hypocrisy of the entire machinery that supports Gaza and that is backed by the West. So, from his point of view, that is from a journalistic point of view, he presents an account of the conflict as seen by him and the consequences that it will have for the future of the world, especially Western civilization. So, if we look at the highlights of the book, first is it's a blend of journalism and research, because the author is bringing his journalistic expertise as well as his expertise as an intellectual thinker and researcher. So I think it stands at the intersection of journalism and field research, because he's not sat in a library and written this work. He's gone out to the field. He's visited the site of the massacre, the Nova Music Festival. He's also visited Gaza. He's gone to tunnels that Hamas built. He has spoken to the survivors, their families. He has spoken to Israeli soldiers. He has spoken to people in power, both in Israel, Palestine. He's even spoken to some Hamas terrorists. If you read the book, you will come to know about it. He's spoken to academicians, other media personnel. So it looks like a longitudinal study, what in research we call a longitudinal study. So the event happened in 2023 and the book was published in 2025 January, I believe. So he's done this study over a long period of time, and the experiences are from real people. Okay, they're not secondary accounts or based on somebody else's work. So that is a highlight of the book in my opinion, because he's getting insights right from where the event happened. He also brings out a lot of human stories of suffering, which we may have seen being reported in the media. I don't know how many of us actually follow media from Israel or Palestine, but through extensive research, he has brought out these human stories of suffering. In all the chapters, there are testimonies. There are narrative accounts with people, with soldiers, with young people, old people. In one chapter, he's also discussed the mental health issues that the survivors of October 7 must have gone through, and how they formed a community to support each other, and what are the dynamics between the government and the people in Israeli society. So that kind of research, which we see very less in mainstream media, that is a part of this book. So he as I said, he went to the conflict zone, risking his life. He visited many areas, he visited the Gaza border, he visited the site of October 7 massacre. He also undertook a visit to the Hamas tunnels. And this is how the book becomes very raw, and it almost feels as if you are there. He also, by speaking to the survivors of October 7 terrorist attack, he has ensured that this is never ever forgotten, that the civilized world never forgets what happened on October 7. And of course, such an attack has happened in Israel earlier also, but he also brings out some lessons to be learned from this attack. He says that the world has to learn how such attacks should not be repeated. So there are many examples in the book. There are stories, there are some very bone chilling moments. For example, in the book, he also details out the conversation between Hamas terrorists as they were killing Israeli civilians, and this terrorist was calling his family, cheering that they have killed a Jew. So these are some bone chilling moments which may be very distressing. You may feel very angry when you read this, but these bring out the raw emotions in terms of what happened then. And then he also gives it a very positive turn when he says that ultimately humanity did triumph, as Israel and Israeli society, they came out of this very successfully. Israeli citizens were able to lead normal lives and support their government, support the survivors, also demand for hostage release. So he adds a lot of on ground examples, human stories, raw emotions, and there are some very emotional moments that he weaves into the narrative. And so, for example, he talks about how the people of Israel helped each other in the aftermath of the attack. He also discusses how uh, Israeli people helped their military in the aftermath of the attack, how common people rose to the occasion, and they did the unexpected. And he also, so one highlight of the book is that it is not, so it is about a conflict and its aftermath, or a terrorist event and its aftermath, but it also gives you valuable lessons in geopolitics, history, and culture. So it is like bringing these three domains together. And for me, these all of this turned out to be the real highlight of the book. I mean, I know the basics of the Israel Palestine conflict, but since we don't belong to the region, we might not have studied in detail about it. But after reading this book, it also disturbed me as to what happened during October 7. So, if I have to review it as a book, I think it's powerful, it's bold, it's novel, and it's refreshing. Not surprisingly, because Douglas Murray has a particular line of thinking, a particular strand of thought, and he's followed that throughout his career. So you will see a lot of consistency in his work in that sense. It has been written in very lucid language. The narrative is very engaging. All chapters are connected with each other. It engages the reader, but at times it is also emotionally distressing, because, after all, you are uh, reading about a terror attack, and he speaks to the kibbutz communities in Israel who were the major victims of this terror attack. So, a lot of times when he's speaking to the survivors or their families, and the way they are narrating how they saw their families being brutally burnt alive, murdered, or massacred by the terrorists, it's not an easy read in that sense. It is also a recommended book for people who are interested in politics, history, and media. And there are some very useful lessons about the past and the present of the Israel-Palestine conflict. So I would not say that this is a book about the conflict itself or the history of the conflict. He touches upon the historical trajectories off and on in the narrative. But if you want to learn about the Israel Palestine conflict in a simple way, then definitely you could pick up this book. But as I said, the major argument remains a thread throughout the book, the response of the West, and a warning to the West that this response may herald the downfall of the Western civilization. Now, I would like to share some personal reflections on the book. So, as I said, I got interested in Douglas Murray's work quite early on and then decided to pick this book. So, of course, he's covering uh, the whole thing from ground zero. He is also talking about the response of the West, and that is how I was engrossed in the book and uh, felt different kinds of emotions as I was reading it. And definitely, I'd be interested in his past works as well his future works. But I would like to share some personal reflections which came to my mind as I was reading this book. So, after reading this work, I think I have learned a lot about Israel, Israeli society, the workings of the Israeli military, and the Israeli worldview. Uh, because Douglas Murray details what Israel's response was to October 7. He also talks to a lot of IDF soldiers. In fact, the IDF reached a little bit late to the site of the Nova Music massacre, and that took Israeli citizens by surprise because in Israel, everyone believes that the IDF is always there to protect them. But here, there was some lag, I think. I don't know what is the right word to be used here, but there was some lag on part of IDF's response. So that becomes a point of discussion in Israel. So if you pick this book, you will definitely learn a lot about what's happening in Israel. And it is, for me, it was very I was awestruck or taken aback by the fact that Israeli people have a very strong will to survive because they are surrounded by states who consider Israel as their enemy. They are surrounded by states who want to annihilate Israel. So the way interviews and narratives have been shared in this book, I learned about how Israeli people deal with all of this on a day to day basis, what they think, what they go through. For example, they always have a safe house in their houses underground, I think, and at any moment that the siren rings, they are ready to go and hide or go and protect themselves and their families. So, what it means to live a life like that, always on the edge, and how Israel is surviving in such an extremely hostile neighborhood. How do they get this grit and determination, and how they continue to be steadfast in protecting their country and their civilization despite the repeated onslaughts that the Jewish race and the Jewish civilization has faced. I also learned a little bit about Israel's history, not in great detail, but a little bit, the creation of Israel and the different wars that Israel has fought. The citizen consciousness that exists in Israel, we all know that Israel has compulsory military service. So, a lot of what Douglas Murray writes about IDF, that is Israeli Defense Forces, he talks to young IDF soldiers, 17, 18, 19-year-old young boys and girls who are protecting their country. And he shares about what life means for them, what makes them uh, what makes them commit themselves and their lives to the protection of that country at such a young age, 18, 19. I mean, in a country like ours or in Western countries, what are young people doing at 18 and 19? But in Israel, young people are enrolled in military services and they are on the front at such a young age. So you will also learn a lot about how the Israeli government is protected to committing even one single Israeli life. The fact that not even one single Israeli life should be at stake, even if one hostage is there, the Israeli state and security apparatus will make all its efforts to rescue their citizens wherever they are in the world or wherever they are in danger. So I also learned a lot about this commitment that the government there has in protecting the lives of the citizens. And as the hostage crisis has played out, you may have read in news that Israel has repeatedly said that they are committed to bringing back every single hostage from Gaza. I also try to make some comparison between India and Israel as civilizational nation states and not just political entities, because I think both the states are home to the native people, to the indigenous people, and right now they are threatened by, or their existence is threatened by radical forces and violent cults. So we can also try and compare the challenges that we as a country face and Israel is facing. Both face a hostile neighborhood. We all know of the recent developments in Bangladesh, the internal security challenges that we face, the existential crisis that we face, especially in the aftermath of Operation Sindoor. And we also know how a compromised citizenry, which late General Bipin Rawat called two and a half front war, how that also threatens India's existence as a sovereign entity and as a civilization. So I was trying to compare the situation that Israel is in with our own context in India. I don't know how far these comparisons are valid, but these are just my reflections that I wanted to share with all of you. Also, there are some very key lessons that one can draw in terms of civilizational survival and human survival from October 7. So, there are many personal stories of loss and courage in this book, and I'll try to share some because there are many, but I've picked up what I thought were very important. So, it's a book that gives us a lot of lessons about the future of civilization and humanity, what should be done to protect humanity from radical and violent cults. And this is also a space that is available to all of us for discussing views that sometimes are cancelled, sometimes they are silenced, sometimes they are marginalized, because we live in a world that is dominated by popular narratives, by narratives that gain currency, by narratives that are trending. So sometimes the real voices and the truth is buried. So these are platforms where the dominant or the hegemonic position and ideas can be challenged, and a strong counterculture can emerge. And I think looking at the nature of Douglas Murray's work, I think as an author, he's decided that he will present a counter narrative to dominant institutions, dominant networks, and dominant platforms in the world. So, while reading this book, there were these personal reflections that came to my mind. So, I kind of extended my thought as a reader and did not want to limit it to only the conflict per se, but also wanted to extrapolate and start thinking about what such a work means for the world. Now, as I said, this is a book which is full of stories. And as I said, there are many, many stories. I just picked up three because those stories have stayed with me. So the first story, and I will try to read some excerpt from the book. The first story is about Yahya Sinwar, who was the chief of Hamas, and of course, he was killed in the counter offensive that Israel had launched. And there is on page 32 and page 33, there is a very detailed story about how once when Yahya Sinwar was captured by Israel, he was kept in a prison, and then he was facing some medical issues. He was kind of he was serving multiple life sentences, but he was also not keeping very well. And there in the prison, there was a dentist, Dr. Yuval Bitten, and both of them, because the dentist used to visit the prison often, he kind of started talking with Yahya Sinwar. And then once when Sinwar was talking about some pain that he had at the back of his neck, the doctor, this dentist, realized that it could be some kind of problem on the brain. So Yahya Sinwar was rushed to the hospital, and a brain tumor was detected. And if he had not been treated on time by the Israeli authorities, he would have died. And this person went on to become the chief of Hamas. And during this time, he started talking to this doctor. So that is one part of the story. And the other part of the story, which is very, very tragic, is that among the residents of Nir Oz, which is a community which was attacked on the morning of October 7, there was a person named Tamir Adar, who was a farmer. He was murdered by the Hamas terrorists. His grandmother was also kidnapped. He was, yeah, he was also kidnapped, and he did not survive, of course. But the tragic part is that Tamir Adar was the nephew of Dr. Yuval Bitten, who had saved the leader, who had saved the life of Hamas's leader. And his nephew was killed, murdered in the October 7th attack. So this was a story that was very tragic and stayed with me. Another story that stayed with me was the story of an encounter which the Israeli Defense Forces did to save hostages. So, in December 2023, this story that you see on the left side, not your fault, mother sends love, support to troops who killed son in tragic error. So this story it made headlines in December 2023. So as the Israeli Defense Forces, they were searching for Hamas, and we know Hamas had captured hostages inside Gaza. There was heavy firing and civilians were emerging from buildings. And at one point, three men came out, one carrying a stick with a white cloth. One of the soldiers felt that the men were a threat. And in a terrible moment, at 30 feet away, this soldier from Israeli Defense Forces thought that these men were terrorists. And he opened fire, and two of the men were killed immediately, and the third one was wounded. These three men turned out to be Yotam Haim, who was 28 years old, Semer Talalka, who was 22, and Alon Shamriz, who was 26. They were not terrorists. They were Israeli hostages who were kidnapped by Hamas from the kibbutz of Kfar Aza on October 7. So by mistake, the Israeli soldiers thought that they were terrorists, and they ended up killing these three people who were not terrorists, they were hostages. Now, what is touching is that this was a terrible mistake that had happened by the military. And the soldiers who had mistakenly killed the hostages, they had terrible morale. They were feeling very bad. They were feeling guilty. It was a terrible mistake that had occurred. But the mother of one hostage who was killed, she sent a direct message to the soldiers. And listen to what this mother says. I am Yotam's mother. I wanted to tell you that I love you very much. She's saying this to the soldiers who killed her son mistakenly. And I hug you here from afar. I know that everything that happened is absolutely not your fault and nobody's fault except that of Hamas. At the first opportunity, you are invited to come to us, whoever wants to, and we want to see you with our own eyes and hug you and tell you that what you did, however hard it is to say this and sad, it was apparently the right thing in that moment. This mother whose son was killed by mistake by the IDF forces is telling these soldiers, don't feel bad, don't feel guilty, come to us. I will give you a hug, and you did the right thing. I couldn't even imagine what kind of courage it might have taken from the mother to say this, and what kind of a society Israelis have built so that a mother can say this. The third is a story of two partners. One is, sorry, yeah, I'll just get to the page where I can read this story for you. Sorry. Okay, idea. Yeah, page 158. Sorry. So this is on page 158, and there are many stories like this, but I just picked ones that I think I could share here. So this was also featured in the news media. This is a story about two men, Omer Ohana and Sagi Golan, who were just about to marry uh, 2 weeks away from October 7th. They were IDF soldiers. They were immediately recalled to their units after this terror attack. Omer was sent to the north of Israel and Sagi was sent to the south of Israel. They both agreed that they would send each other a heart on WhatsApp every hour to let the other know they were okay. 33-year-old Sagi fought with his anti-terrorism unit in Kibbutz Be'eri, among other sites, and saved many lives that day. Omer said, on midnight, I got the last heart from Sagi. His fiancée was killed shortly afterward in the ongoing battle in Be'eri. The Israeli singer, Ivri Lider, who was due to sing a song they had chosen for their wedding, that song was now performed at the funeral of Sagi Golan. So there are many, many such stories that are covered in the book. Now I will move to the concluding part of my review and discussion. Who do I think are the readers for this book? Whom is the book targeted towards? So anybody interested in world affairs, geopolitics, history, culture, media analysis, counterterrorism, journalists, students of journalism, political science, academics, international relations, etc. Anybody who's interested in Israel studies and Jewish history can read this book, and anybody who's interested in exploring views on the conflict that are very different from what we read in the mainstream media can pick up this book. I think this is a book definitely not for terror apologists. If there are people who support such terrorist activities as carried out by Hamas, then this is not a book for them. This is definitely not a book for critics of Israel, and there are many. Also, not a book for those who sympathize with the Palestinian cause, those who lack an open mind, and those with little interest in world affairs. And also, this is not a book where you would get to understand the history and the finer nuances of the conflict. This is about a particular event and the response to it. So, this is not a book that you should pick up if your objective is to learn about the history of the Israel-Palestine conflict from both sides of the table. You will understand a little bit of history, but that is only in a piecemeal way. If you're only interested in understanding the historical aspects, this is not a book for you because it's about a contemporary event. Of course, like every work, there is some valid criticism of Murray's work and Murray's book. So, Douglas Murray is not a very likable person in the mainstream discourse. He's criticized very often, and there are a lot of rebuttals and negative reviews also given to the book. But I'm just putting up or putting across some major points which have been put forward as a criticism of the book. So, one very obvious criticism is that the way the book presents facts, it only does so to generate sympathy for the Israeli position in the conflict and show Israel in a positive light. That is one criticism of this book that has been leveled time and again, that you're only presenting the Israeli position. What about the Palestinian position? And we can have different thoughts on this. Of course, this is not the first book that Douglas Murray has written on Israel. As I said, he's reported on Israel, and the Israeli ecosystem or the Israeli apparatus has called him a steadfast ally. So there are accusations that he's biased and he's not objective or neutral in his analysis. He's been criticized for presenting one sided arguments in this book. And one criticism is that he's not at all talking about the destruction that Israel carried out in Gaza post October 7, 2023, Israel's violation of human rights and the human suffering in Gaza after this event. He's not talked about it. He's maybe talked about it here and there, but that's definitely not the focus of this book. So that's another criticism. He's also criticized for painting, like having this view that there is only black and white and there are no shades of gray. So Israeli society is good. Israelis are good. Israel has a justifiable position. Israel is right. Israel is the defender of human civilization. And everything about Palestine and Palestinian society is bad. And he also gives examples to say what he's saying, but this is how the arguments in the book come across, that there is nothing good about Palestinian people and there is everything good about Israeli society and people. Of course, it is written largely from the Western viewpoint. I don't think we can criticize Murray for it because he's been rooted in the Western context. So he's not going to definitely write about the African position or the Indian position or the Latin American position. Is talking about the Anglo American position here. So I don't know how far in India we can look at his work and think of how he's trying to present our point of view, because he's not. We have to probably develop our own response to this. Some critics have also questioned his sources and his style of journalism, which they argue is one sided, biased, and as I said, the use of facts to present the Israeli position. But as I said, he doesn't shy away from it. He's making it very, very clear, right in the beginning, that this is the position I am writing this work from. This is where I come from. This is my context. This is where I bring all of this from. Also, he doesn't present any solutions throughout the 5 chapters that you will see. He's not talking about any solutions to the Israel-Palestine conflict or solutions in dealing with radical ideologies and violent cults. He's presenting the reality. Or if he's presenting a solution, it's very, very simplistic. It's probably not as detailed and as nuanced and as elaborated. So there is no, or there is little discussion on the solution. He's been regularly criticized for defending Israel. And in fact, when this book was released in January 2025, I believe, some of the media channels in Europe, I think in Germany also, yeah, some of the media channels in Europe, they refused to review this book. And some bookstores in Germany, they deplatformed the book. Some bookstores, they refused to even place the book on their shelves. So he's not a very um, uh, underplayed figure in the public discourse. He has his own share of arguments and controversies, but he's out there to defend himself and his position. And personally, while reading the book, I felt that while he has presented a lot of facts, stories, and arguments very well, his this book particularly, or probably that was not the objective of this book in the first place. He doesn't address the root issue of what the West and Israel are facing. That, in my opinion, that root issue is exclusionary radical Islamic ideology, the violent Islamic cult, which the entire world is taking note of, but uh, the response has been really weak, especially from the West. But there is no discussion on this issue in the book. He keeps talking about violent ideologies, radical cults, but he doesn't pinpoint any specific, he doesn't specifically talk about these terror outfits which are inspired and influenced by radical Islam. So these are some critical things that we can look to when we are reading the book. So, just to close, these are some other works of Douglas Murray: War on the West, Neoconservatism, The Strange Death of Europe. You can find his writings in New York Post, Spectator. You can find him on Sky News, BBC. He is also associated with the Manhattan Institute, with the Hudson Institute. So he's with many of these think tanks. So you can explore his body of work if interested. And these are some references that I would recommend: his own website, his own YouTube channel, his writings on medium.com and Substack. The list of his books is available on Amazon, and he regularly writes for Spectator and New York Post. So if you want to start reading his work and don't want to directly read this book, you can probably read some of his popular articles, some of the media commentaries that he contributes. Yeah, that's the end of my presentation. Thank you so much. I think I went on for a long time, but since Biswajit ji had told me that I can take time as much as I want. So thank you so much. Namaste.
Thank you, Nidhi ji. If there are any questions, please go ahead and ask them, participants, attendees.
Okay, I see a question in the chat box. Just a minute. I just read it. Okay, I think Somnath Sinha ji, in terms of threat perception and threat assessment, what does this mean for Bharatiya society for us to do civil defense drills on a daily basis? After all, after Yehud, it will be the turn of the Hanud, and Hamas fighters were felicitated in POK recently. They came all the way over here, traveling across Lebanon, Syria, Iran. West is lost. What can we do not to become too stupid to survive? The word solution is very loaded. Yes, I agree, Somnaji. Final solution. Albanese of Australia is not very clear about what is not the root cause. Yeah, correct. That's right. So I'll answer Somnathji's question about what does this mean for Bharatiya society and what can we do. I think it means the same for Bharatiya society as it means for Israeli society. The difference is that at least Israeli society has recognized the threat because they have been living with this threat for a very, very long time. But unfortunately, we have not even recognized the threat. We refuse to speak about it. We refuse to engage in any discussion about it. We refuse to talk about it openly and honestly. We are too politically correct all the times. We have fears of being cancelled or fears of being labeled. So I think the situation is not very different. Maybe the situation is graver in the West because they have a very serious issue with mass immigration at this moment. We are still like them, also struggling to come to terms with illegal immigration in our country, but the threat is very clear. And what immediately should be done before even we can start civil defense drills or getting ourselves prepared to face this threat is that we should recognize the threat. We should talk about it. We should discuss about it. We should engage intellectually with this issue, and we should use all our institutions and forums to talk about these issues. I think we are not doing that at this moment. Unfortunately, our leadership, our media, our civil society institutions, none of them have recognized what we are facing. So, in my opinion, the first thing is to recognize the threat and talk about it. Yes, I think there was a question by Nikhilesh.
Good evening, and really it was very insightful session, and we learned a lot of things about Israel. Just one question that, as a reporter, as you said, he hasn't given any solution. Sorry, as an author, he hasn't given any solution. But is it due to being a reporter? That might be one of the reasons that generally reporters just give facts, and in that way, he was able to convey people what exactly the situation is, and in subtle way he has answered that it is up to you to get the solution. It doesn't lie with the book or whatever it is, but it is up to you to protect, defend the civilization or whatever we call it.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Nikhilesh, for that question. I know where it is coming from because you've also been a journalist, a reporter, and you've also reported from the ground. So it's a very valid question. Uh, I think in this particular work, he's not talked about solutions because he's more invested as a journalist in bringing the facts and the threats that are faced by Western civilization forward to him as a journalist. And all of us know that journalists have to select and have to frame, they have to choose, and they also have to decide what to keep inside the purview of the frame and outside the purview of the frame. So maybe he's done that very purposefully, and maybe, and this is I'm just assuming what he might have thought while writing this book. One thing is that this was a very immediate kind of a journalistic work,
Correct.
because he, after October 7, he immediately goes to Israel, and he
Correct.
immediately starts reporting and talking about these issues. And then based on all his reportings and writings, he has put this into together in the form of a very seamless narrative. So I think the reason why he has not focused on the solution, though he keeps on talking about it in between, is because he feels that the threat, it is more important for him as a journalist and as an author to talk about the threat rather than the solution, because he feels that we are not even, we means the Western world, they haven't even recognized the threat. So that is why I feel he doesn't talk much about the solution, which I think he should have, but probably he has his own ideas as an author, and probably because his body of work is already quite vast, he may come up with another book to talk about it. That's my, and I think I would be able to maybe I would be able to answer it with more conviction if I had read previous works by him. But now I am going to do that. So, in that sense, yes, Dr. Nikhilesh. You are on mute, Dr. Nikhilesh. We can't hear you.
Uh, Thank you. That was really very much insightful, and I had just that doubt whether this might have happened or not. Or being a journalist, it was more focusing on that, and considering the fact that he has brought up those stories out in his book that are real life stories, which a journalist generally brings in. So thank you for
Yeah,
that,
I
and
think,
it was a really
yeah,
very
it's
good
a
review
must
and
read.
insightful session.
Thank you so much. I think since you, Dr. Chitralekha, you're all connected with journalism, you have been journalists, you will really love
Hmm.
reading this book. You may not agree with his views, but purely from the journalistic point of view, it is a good work.
Okay.
Okay, I'll
Thank you.
answer Rohitji's question. You shared an example of an Israeli mother setting aside the sorrow of her son's death and forgiving the soldiers who killed her son by following Yeah, that's right. How can we promote such culture in the contemporary Indian society? It did exist in the past. Uh, yes, it definitely existed in the past. Yesterday, we commemorated Veer Bal Divas, where we remember the sacrifices of Sahibzades and how these two young children sacrificed their life for dharma, for civilization. They didn't even think about it for a moment, and their grandmother was with them all the time. So, definitely, it existed in the past. I don't think it exists now in a major way, except for those who are serving us at the border, who continue to serve us with their selfless uh, values. That example was, it pierced my heart because if you put yourself in the position of their mother, it would be really difficult. But I think that's part of the Israeli DNA, Rohitji. It's part of how Israel looks at itself as a civilization, as a culture, as a country, as a society. It's ingrained in them, and they've achieved this through years and years of work. I think when if you talk to young Jewish people, they're well aware of their history, they're well aware of the Holocaust, they know what sacrifices their ancestors have made for Israel to exist as an independent nation state. And they always know that the aspiration and the dream of a Jewish homeland had to be uh, made a reality. I will share one incident where a journalist friend of mine met the Israeli ambassador, and the Israeli ambassador, or maybe she was a diplomat, she said that India can afford to probably lose an inch of their territory because you have vast territory, but we will never ever surrender even 1 inch of Israeli territory. So I think that sentiment comes from the fact that they are constantly threatened. And there's one beautiful statement that I would like to read out as response to Rohit ji's question. We will realize the crux of the book. In this one statement lies the crux of the book. There is an old line that Jews everywhere in the world know. Wherever they are in the world, they should keep a bag packed in case they had to leave. From the moment the state of Israel was created, there was one certainty above all. As embattled as Israel might be, and as hated as it often seemed to be from every side, at least this was a place where Jews could be safe and protect themselves. After October 7 happened and a doubt spread among Jews in Israel and around the world, what if we aren't safe in आइदर जब ऐसा सेंटिमेंट आपके सिटीजन्स में हो तभी ऐसा रिस्पॉन्स किसी माता से मिल सकता है कि वो उन सोल्जर्स को भी माफ कर दे जिन्होंने गलती से उसके बेटे को मारा आई थिंक दैट रिक्वायर्स अ वेरी डिफरेंट काइंड ऑफ कैरेक्टर बिल्डिंग
I think Rohit ji has another question.
Yeah. So thank you. You actually read my mind after asking that question, sending her the text. I remembered that in one of the Jewish festivals, Passover, what you just shared with us, they actually they have a practice of reminding the younger generation of the atrocities on them, which we don't do. The Hindus, the Sanatanis don't do. So every year they remind in their Seder, which is their 2 nights of feast that they in the evening they share with their families. They recite their stories, the atrocities on them over centuries. Should a Hindus create like Shahzad, yesterday on the 25th, we said, I don't know if I should say celebrated, but we observed a day of Shahzada Day, right, or Divas. On that day, perhaps we should perhaps the Sanatanis should start a practice of reminding their younger generations what their ancestors went through. The largest genocide in the
Mm.
history of the world, human race, was on Hindus. Uh,
Yes.
uh, and this was actually documented by not Hindus, unfortunately, but by
Yes.
a US author. I forgot
Yes.
his name, William something.
Yes,
So,
William, I think Will Durant. Will Durant.
yeah, Will Durant, right. So perhaps it's time for Hindus to, I don't want to say mimic, but learn from the Jewish practices and solidify um, or not I don't know what the right word is, but to change some of the practices, incorporate some of the Jewish practices to, so that it's not enough to say the reason we call ourselves our tradition Sanatan because it always existed and history has always shown that we will exist. That's a false promise, in my assurance, in my opinion, because before you knew it, you lost Afghanistan, you lost Pakistan, you lost all these countries. Don't be under this false assurance that you will not never lose India. You may
Correct.
lose in no time.
Yes, correct. So thank you, Rohit ji, for that extended comment and very useful insight you have shared. I totally endorse your point that we should not be under this illusion that just because we have survived many brutal foreign onslaughts and we are Sanatani, so we will continue to survive. That reality may no longer be true. We know of many ancient past civilizations which no longer exist. They are not living civilizations anymore. They are museum civilizations now. Practitioners of these civilizations have been destroyed and they have been wiped out from the face of the earth. So, no reason for us to believe that we are an exception and we will continue to kind of find ways to survive these onslaughts from cult ideologies. So, I totally endorse this point of view. We do have a lot to learn from Israel, not just as a society or as people, but also a lot to learn from the Israeli state, a lot to learn from Israeli leadership. They also have their internal differences and politics and contentious issues being debated in society all along, but their stance is extremely clear on position of national security, on the existence of Israel as a state, and on the protection of Jewish people. In fact, I had also heard that when October 7 happened, and when there was need for Israeli people to stand as reserves in the IDF, many Jewish people, Israeli people who were residing in the West, they had flown from the West to Israel to serve the motherland. So there is a lot to learn, and I think the first thing, as I said, we could do is first talking about all these issues with our young people, with at a mass level, and also recognize the threat that we face. Unfortunately, today we are still in deep slumber and fail to recognize the threat that we are facing. At least Israel recognizes this threat and they are very clear and explicit about the position that they hold. And there is another interesting excerpt, which is probably the last excerpt that I would read. And this is a very useful comparison that Douglas Murray does between the West and Israel. Just a moment. It's on page 141, right? I had to just keep note of these page numbers because otherwise I would forget. So, in this particular excerpt, Douglas Murray says that he was speaking to a young woman in uniform who was sitting opposite to him. He asked her how old she was, and she said, I'm 23. I asked about her service because we know about compulsory military service in Israel. She said, I am an intelligence expert on Yemen. At 23, she was an intelligence expert on Yemen. And as Douglas Murray looked at her, he started thinking about what a young girl of 23 in the Western world is doing. Because remember, he's writing this book from the Western point of view. And he said that there may be exceptions, but the young girls of 23 that he has met in the West, regardless of their economic status, they are not only privileged, but they are entitled. And these young IDF soldiers, men and women, they played a very crucial role in the immediate response of saving people and being on alert and guarding Israel immediately after October 7. Otherwise, the Hamas terrorists would have entered deep inside Israel. So he says that the young men and women in the West expect that the world will revolve around them, and that should be endlessly interested only in them, some kind of self-obsession. They have been told before that they have been told before they have even done anything that they are very remarkable and special people. And he said, I was thinking of these 23-year-old American girls who have studied in Stanford, Yale, or Columbia. And he said, I felt the absolute certainty that this Israeli girl, 23 years old, sitting in front of him, was not just already out in the world, but she was way ahead of her contemporaries elsewhere. She was already doing something very useful with her life for her country. And then he is saying, I wondered who is likely to make a greater contribution, the 23-year-old girl in the West or this 23-year-old girl who is defending her country. I think that answers our question with such a mindset, which we clearly lack. We need to kind of cultivate this kind of mindset, and that can only be done when we recognize what we face. Until we recognize that, we are still going to be in our own illusions. Thank you.
I think Nidhi ji will end with the video that you wanted to play.
Okay.
Yeah.
So let me, yeah. It's not a very long video. The video that I wanted to show, I'm unable to locate it on YouTube, unfortunately, but I'll still show this one. This is Douglas Murray speaking about his book when he was about to release the book. It's on the YouTube channel of Manhattan Institute, so we can just listen to it.
I'm here in New York at the Manhattan Institute, and this book, my new book on democracies and death cults, is out on April the 8th. Some people seem to think that October the 7th and its aftermath effectively only affects the Jewish state and its neighbors in the region, that this is simply another Middle Eastern war which people elsewhere can avoid. And I think that's flat out wrong. I think that what Israel glimpsed on October the 7th, what it actually stared in the face on October the 7th, is something which every liberal democracy could face at some point again, possibly quite soon. It's staring straight in to groups, death cults, which want to destroy everything that we have, that actually do hate everything that we have. It's not just a case of a minor disagreement on something. It's a very deep doctrinal attack on the fundamentals of the West. And that's one of the reasons, among many others, why I wrote this book, because I want people to realize not just what needs to be defended, but what is coming, what could yet be coming very soon again to countries like Britain, America, Western Europe, and other democracies. The challenge of the jihadists like Hamas is not just about the Jewish state, it's not just about the Jewish people, important as that is. It's about Christians, atheists, everybody else next, which is one of the reasons why people need to understand this ideology if we're going to be able to counter it. On Democracies and Death Cults is available for pre-order now. You can order it through Amazon anywhere in the world. You can order it through Waterstones in the UK, Barnes & Noble in the US, any other bookshop. Order it on Audible. I did the audiobook recording myself recently. And you can also order it through the Manhattan Institute's website here in New York City.
Yes, so this was the author himself speaking about the book. And the last point is, why is this book titled On Democracies and Death Cults? Very, very simple. There's a powerful statement that Douglas Murray makes in this book, that you are dealing with people who love death more than they love life. So that is why the title, On Democracies and Death Cults. The struggle, the conflict, the future conflict in the world is going to be between liberal democracies and death cults. And democracies, as in Western democracies in particular, are dealing with people who love death more than they love life. So that is the challenge that the world faces. And that is the challenge he analyzes in this book.
Thank you, Nidhi ji. Thank you, all the participants, all the attendees. Yeah, I think we'll end it here.
Yes. Yeah. Thank you, everyone. Thank you for
Okay.
listening
Have a
patiently. And thank you, Voice of India, for this opportunity.
yeah. Good
Thank
night, everyone.
Good night.
Thank you and good night.
Good night.